Before we do, I'd like to introduce this morning's keynote speaker. I had an opportunity to meet this gentleman at South by Southwest EDU last year, where we sat on a panel around teacher evaluation. But the most amazing thing to come from that experience was the chance to meet James Ford Jr., North Carolina Teacher of the Year 2015. James is a reformed journalist turned urban educator. He says he was never a great student, but that is what has made him an incredible teacher. I can really relate to that. C student. He is a passionate pro-equity, anti-racist advocate for education. He is a warm, wonderful, genuine, incredible human being. I want you to just stand next to him and be better for it. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome James Ford Jr.
Well, that's a lot of love. Well, good morning. It's working? Sorry. I have to confess to you, I'm really excited. In fact, I was super excited and super humbled when I first got the invitation to come do the opening keynote for the NNSTOY conference. I also want to confess and be transparent here and say I was also a little bit nervous, if that's okay to say. And it's not because I'm afraid to get up in front of people and talk, because anybody who knows me or has talked to me for longer than 30 seconds knows Ford can talk, right? Even when nobody's listening, Ford is going to talk. So that wasn't really the issue. But the issue for me was really, I wanted to be inspiring, right? I felt a certain pressure to offer and fit the theme of this conference, to be motivational, to be inspirational. I mean, after all, it's not every day you get a chance to stand shoulder to shoulder with some of the finest educators throughout the nation and come together and collaborate and talk about ways to improve our craft. And so it's a tremendous honor, right, to be in front of everybody and to be in this situation. But in order to accomplish that, right, in order to accomplish this target goal of setting you guys up for the conference, saying something that encapsulates all the 4 problems of practice, allowing you all to go into the rest of your sessions feeling on fire, feeling cathartic, I almost did something that I advocate that educators never do, and that is to ignore our present context. I was really tempted to do that in order to accomplish that underlying task. But for me, I'm just convinced that there's no way to tear circumstances out of the pages of history or to dislocate our social and political position. For me, there's just no such thing as a culturally neutral, depoliticized, detached educational process. And regardless of your political stripes and where you come from and how you interact with the world, I think we all can acknowledge that all is not well in America right now. And so I felt incumbent upon me to respond to that. And when I look at the situation that envelops our institution right now, I see a lot of things that give me worry, they give me pause, and frankly, a lot of things that are frightening. I'm troubled by the lack of humanity. I'm troubled by the rapid decay of our morality. I'm troubled by constantly being riddled with falsehoods and half-truths, which are whole lies, by the way. But mostly, I'm troubled by us rolling back protections on our most vulnerable populations in our country. And so, listen, most times I'm ready to fight, right? I'm a guy who approaches and attacks issues and circumstances of injustice with energy, with vigor. But I'm also human, y'all. And so it's difficult for me because I haven't felt that motivated or inspired. And so I've been wrestling with this question of how do I give to you all that which I don't have myself? No sooner than I began to think about that, I thought about this shirt that I bought a couple years ago. Random, right? While I was visiting New Orleans, I visited an art studio run by a local creative named Brandon B. Mike Odoms. And the shirt on the front of it was emblazoned with the most powerful and succinct statement. It said, "I am my ancestors' wildest dreams." And when I looked at that shirt, when I saw it for the first time, I was like, wow. Like, it just spoke to me, and I said, I gotta have that shirt. It just made me feel a sense of empowerment. It made me feel that that I had a sense of destiny, that my steps were ordered, that I was being marched along a path that had been laid for me by folks who had come before. It made me feel great. But given the circumstance I just talked to you about, I was forced to think about that commentary on a much deeper level. You see, I visited the Whitney plantation down in Louisiana, and I know, as a history teacher, I know the history of chattel and perpetual slavery. I know that people were reduced to the level of livestock and had their fates sealed, that folks were trapped in a system that guaranteed that not only they themselves, but that their children and their children's children would remain enslaved for perpetuity. So then I asked myself, in that environment, which must have been just suffocating, right? It must have just choked out any hope that people could have had for a better life. In that environment, what would make people dream wildly? I thought about my grandparents, sharecroppers in rural Arkansas, who were born into an economic arrangement that basically ensured that they would stay in a cycle of perpetual debt, who somehow found the way to move north to Illinois, where they raised 5 children, 10 grandchildren, one of whom would go on to become the North Carolina Teacher of the Year. I got to think about other groups of people. I started thinking about women, right? So what would cause women who didn't even get the right to vote until 1920, right? Who couldn't even file a sexual harassment lawsuit until 1977, to believe that they could now be able to hold very powerful men accountable for their lewd actions, and even believe that they could run for office, in fact, even the highest office in the land. I began to think about, frankly, America. And I said, what would cause a ragtag group of colonial farmers to believe that they could break away from their mother country, declare their independence, take up arms, and fight against what at that time was the most powerful empire in the world, and ultimately succeed in doing so? I thought about all these things, and then what I landed on was the answer to my question: radical imagination. It was radical imagination that inspired each of those groups. I was first introduced to this concept when I stumbled upon the writings of Max Havin. And I like it because it talks about something we rarely explore. See, radical imagination deals with not just the problems, it acknowledges the present reality, it doesn't negate that, but it looks beyond the present reality to say we ought to deal with things not just as they are, but ultimately we have to start looking at things for as they should be. And this is not some passive kumbaya, coconut smile, let's all get along type of stuff here. This is not that, okay? But really it is radical in the sense that when all hope has been lost and when you're wallowing in despair, there are some times where the most rebellious thing that you can do is begin to think about a reality beyond that which we are entrapped in. Where you have to not give up and hold out hope despite what things look like in front of you. We have to dedicate yourself to constructing an alternative reality. It is actually a form of resistance. And it's the way that each of those populations that I talked about, whether we called it that or not, it's how they made it through. And so then I began to think about what that means for us. And I thought to myself that as educators, but as citizens, really, we're going to have to start thinking about constructing a new reality. There is an author by the name of Robin D.G. Kelly who says that sometimes without vision, we get so caught up in what we want to knock down that we forget what we want to build. And we can't allow, because that's how oppression works. Oppression works in such a way that it assaults you for so long that you're so caught up in fighting against something that you almost forget what you're fighting for. So we have to commit ourselves today to produce an alternative reality and adopt a radical imagination as educators. And ultimately, we're going to have to march headlong into what I like to call a new America. Because I'm sad to inform you, but the old America is dead and stinking. Now, we can debate. Some of us may say that it died recently, a couple years ago. And some folks like myself would argue that it had died a long time ago. And that the climate is just such that the stench has now carried where other folks who couldn't smell it before are holding their nose. There's no reason to feel bad about it because it needed to happen, y'all. It needed to happen because it was built on a bogus foundation of inequality, of lies and mythology and phony patriotism. But this offers us the opportunity to ask ourselves, how do we carry forward? How do we carry on as a nation where the demographics are rapidly changing and black and brown folk are now becoming the majority? And white folk are actually becoming a minority. How do we carry on in a nation in that present reality? How do we carry on as a nation when despite all of our wealth and all of our opulence, where 50% of our citizens are living at or near poverty? How do we carry on as a nation where police officers in our given criminal justice system can shoot and kill unarmed citizens, primarily black and brown, with impunity? How do we carry on in an environment where we can ban folks from traveling from predominantly Muslim countries, or where we deny asylum to families that are seeking such, where we tell trans men and women in the military that they shouldn't be able to serve their country? Those are actually the wrong questions, because a radical imagination asked a different type of question. It asked this: what does an America look like where white supremacy no longer exists? What does an America look like where gender discrimination and sexism and sexual harassment no longer exists? What does an America look like where the class status that you're born into no longer determines your access? These are the sort of radical imaginative questions we have to ask ourselves. And with the time that I have allotted, and some of y'all know outside of teaching I do a little preaching too, so I'm gonna hit y'all with 3 points and we're gonna get up out of here. I want to tell you my vision of the new America. The first thing that I think we have to do in order to construct a new America is we have to be honest. I imagine an America where educators, all educators, adopt a critical pedagogy in their classroom that critiques and interrogates systems and structures of power, where we are honest about where we are and how we got here. See, the thing is, one of the first things to die, one of the first casualties in this environment that we're in right now is the truth. And when the truth dies, lies begin to grow in their place. And I think that's exactly what's happening right now. The persistent gaslighting is a result of being miseducated. And it's incumbent upon educators to wage that war, wage that battle, as it were, in the classrooms that you all sit in. We have to be honest. We got to start telling the truth about how we got where we're at. And to be frank, a lot of these things are not unprecedented, okay? This is not the first time that our nation has stripped children away from their families. All you need to do is talk to some African-American folk who will tell you all about the institution of slavery and how that was a linchpin, the separation and selling of families. Talk to some Native American folk who know all too well about having their children sent to boarding schools or residential schools where they were ultimately stripped of their cultural identity and quote unquote civilized. We know all too well. This is not the first time that whole families have been interned for political purposes in our country. Right? We have to begin to be honest about these things. And this is not the first time we have conducted mass deportations of Latino folks. Talk to Mexican American folk. This is not the first go around. When we adopt a critical pedagogy, when we are honest and truthful about what's happening, we don't allow these sort of lies to continue, because they are confronted in the classroom, confronted as part of the educational process. I envision and I imagine an America where teachers can begin to speak forthrightly about how we got here. And we can talk about the immigration crisis, but we can also acknowledge the reasons why families are fleeing from Central American countries and talk about our nation's involvement in those countries. We can talk about the supporting of military coups and the installation of puppet dictators and interfering in other countries' affairs. We have to be honest. This is the only way forward, okay? Well, we can no longer talk and we can retire these phrases like, this is not America or this is un-American. When you do that, you erase the experiences of so many of your students' communities who know all too well that this has been our America. This has been our present reality for as long as we've known it. So we have to be honest. The second thing we have to do is we have to be vocal. Listen, nobody's better positioned than teachers to really speak up and speak out with conviction on issues that are of particular import to their students. We need teachers to be leaders as well now, to really start stepping out on a limb and speaking truth to power. Recently I was conducting a workshop with one of my friends and colleagues, Ann McCall. She's an education attorney in North Carolina. And she does these excellent workshops where she explores the history of race in education in North Carolina. And really she unearths a lot of unpopular truths about how our state, which usually is given a progressive sort of veneer, how we responded to things such as Brown versus Board of Education. A lot of it was very covert and very racist motivation for education policy. But when we were working with, she allowed me to co-facilitate with her, and we were working with a group of teachers. And I began to break them out and give them question prompts. There was one question that an individual teacher really struggled with, and the question was, what responsibility do teachers have to disrupt racism? And he struggled, and he looked, and he basically said that, he said, listen, in the part of the county where he teaches is rural, and he confessed, he said, I know I got students whose parents are avowed white supremacists. And I also have students of a significant contingent of whom are children of color, Black and Latino. And so the best thing he could think of was I just try to present both sides and be even-handed. That was the most that he could say in that environment. So I wasn't struck necessarily by the lack of will as much as what he perceived as his lack of power, lack of authority in that situation, that he didn't feel empowered as an educator to have to respond to things that really speak to the core values of our institution and, if you would like, our country. And so I said, things like that have to change, and we need models. And so in case people don't know what I'm talking about, I brought a couple models or examples that I think you guys could look forward to. We need more teachers like Sean Sheehan and Johanna Hayes. Teachers who are so convicted by their belief in a fair and just society, they've decided to put their money where their mouth is and actually run for office. Sean ran for Senate in Oklahoma, and Johanna Hayes is running right now to be a part of the U.S. Congress in Connecticut. These are the sort of teacher leaders that we need for the next generation in my radical imagination. But you know what? If that's not your bag, you can be like John Hazel or be like Abdul Wright. John Hazel, who in the presence of power, when meeting with our current Secretary of Education, although he supported the administration, talked about how he was upset and how the policies that were being enacted were negatively impacting education in his state. Abdul Wright, who when he visited the White House and stood in the Oval Office with our president, found a way to sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. He actually began to lead the rest of the stories in the Black National Anthem. That's the sort of leadership that's needed for the future. Manny, if you can't say anything, still find a way to find your voice. Our National Teacher of the Year, Mandy Manning, who when visiting and being awarded with the National Teacher of the Year honor, was disallowed, as I understand, to speak, but still found a way to represent the voices of her students by wearing pens that represented her various causes and giving a stack of letters from refugee students to talk about what living in America has meant to them. And if you can't do that, how about you write? Find ways to be like Tom Rademacher and Kalisa Wing, who have produced writings that talk about the struggles of education and also the systemic things that show up in our classrooms that we're also oftentimes not prepared to deal with. This is important as well. And if you ain't got a book in you, you can always clap back at a side-talking celebrity like Monica Washington and making your voice heard when people say stuff that's absolutely erroneous. This is the leadership that's needed for the future. And lastly, as I prepare to close, the third thing we need to do is we need to be vigilant. The forces arrayed against us are very powerful. They are mighty, and they strike fear in the hearts of many, even some of the most well-meaning and typically some of the most inspired folk. And it can wear you out. It can cause you to wallow in despair, but I want to tell you not to give up, because much like I called upon the tradition of my ancestors, we also have a lineage as educators as well that we can pull on. the educators who have gone before us. Luminary educators like Jane Elliott from Iowa, anti-racist educator who, after the assassination of Dr. King, felt a need to teach her predominantly white students about the scourge of racism. She later went on and has gone on to do workshops all over the country in this vein. She's a legend. Folks like Bob Moses, legendary educator, who has inspired and has raised up a generation of so many civil rights activists, who himself risked life and limb to register voters in the Jim Crow South, and ultimately end up developing organizers to take on certain actions such as Freedom Summer. And folks like Sal Castro, a high school teacher in East LA, who inspired his Chicano students to recognize they were worthy of a quality education, worthy of being taught about their history, so much so that they waged a walkout that I didn't even learn about until I was in college, where students walked out and protested for days on end to receive a better education. He lost his job if it weren't for the community and the students protesting for weeks for him to receive his job back. This is where we come from. This is our lineage as well. And this is our calling. And so, as I look through my radical imagination, these are the examples and the steps that I think we need to take if we're to carry on forward. So as you prepare to hear from the rest of our speakers today, as you go to the rest of your workshops throughout the duration of this conference, I want you to hang in your mind what the new America looks like and begin to ignite a radical imagination within your heart and your soul. And I'll leave you with this quote from Carter G. Woodson, also the creator of Black History Month. And it says, but can you expect teachers to revolutionize the social order for the good of the community? Indeed, we must expect this very thing. The educational system of the country is worthless unless it accomplishes this task. If you believe this, I want you to repeat after me. I am revolutionary. I am an revolutionary. If you believe that, I want you to take this radical imagination with you henceforth and forever in our strive for freedom, justice, equality, and equity. Thank you so much.